The title of my confessions is called Behind Enemy Lines.
Come on now.
And since everybody always throw out a subtitle,
You better give it.
I thought I might as well too.
Come on, man.
So my subtitle would be The War Zone.
Hey!
You better come on with it.
So in Joshua 6, we all heard of the walls of Jericho. We know about the story, but let's read it and just make sure we have our background knowledge. Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were afraid of the Israelites. No one was allowed to go out or in. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king and all its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priest give one long blast on the ram horn, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse and the people can charge straight into the town. I have come to tell you on today that the path to walk with God, yeah, it starts out high, but as followers of God, we have to be ready to engage the fight underneath. And when you get behind enemy lines, you have to begin to develop your strategy to fight. And see, we get lost at this thing because what we don't know is even though we have to develop a strategy, the enemy begins to develop a strategy of his own. We already know that he is not just this chaotic, unorganized person. We know that he has built-in levels and he's strategically planning things to attack us. Therefore, we have to get our strategy together. This is the strategy that we see developed by Joshua and the Israelites, given to them by God. So what is your strategy? Or are you going behind enemy lines unprepared? And we see, let's jump down to 17. Jericho and everything in it must be completely destroyed as an offering to the Lord. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and the others in her house will be spared, for she protected our spies. Not only was Rahab behind enemy lines, but Rahab was living behind enemy lines. And some of us, see, we have packed up our camp and we have decided to live behind enemy lines. And we go in there, and we go in unprepared and we have no strategy, even though you decide to live there. So what is your strategy, church? To come against the devil. See, he has a strategy for us. And if your strategy is a 6'4" light skin with orange and black Jordans, he's going to throw him in your face every day. And if your strategy is a dark skin with long Brazilian weave and red heels, he's going to throw you in his face every day. And see, I tell people all the time my favorite subject in school is social studies and science, and I love it. And I can tell you the president is from George Washington, 1789, all the way down to Donald J. Trump to 2019. And the thing that was my favorite thing in social studies is when we begin to talk about World War I and World War II. And in World War I, they developed this system of fighting and they called it trench warfare. Let me tell you, church, trench warfare, people would begin to dig these trenches and they would go along for miles and miles and they dig them so deep that a 6-foot man can stand tall and still be covered. And not only would the enemy begin to build trench warfare, but the allies and the spies that were going against the enemy began to build trenches. And in these trenches, they'd be miles and miles apart, but you can still send gunfire across. And in between these trenches would be land, and we call no man's land, because neither side would get the advantage, and neither side would be attacked, and neither side could gain advantage over the other side. I'm here to tell you today that some of you are stuck in the trenches. And not only that, but when they begin to get stuck in the trenches and neither side would gain the advantage and neither side would get the disadvantage, they said the war was in a stalemate. I'm here to tell you that the people of Christ from today are in stalemate. And neither one of us are gaining sides because we're fighting so hard that the enemy cannot attack us. But at the same time, we're not fighting hard enough to overcome him. Not only did they have trench warfare, but sometimes they would send in enemy spies. They would send airplanes across to take pictures of people, and not only pictures of people, but the weapons that we would begin to building. The enemy has begun to send spies into your life. And not only are they taking pictures in what you are doing, but they are learning your strategic plan to overcome the enemy. And that's when he can begin to throw you off from the inside. You have to know your enemy. You have to know your enemy. It is crucial in the season that we in to know your enemy and how he is going to begin to attack you. And it's crucial in this season to know how he is going to overcome you. Because not only if he can overcome you, he can overcome your family. And you begin to preach and you begin to pray and you press and you will try to protect your family. But how can you protect them when the enemy knows your war plan? I'm sorry, I gotta go back to the trenches. Let's go back to the trenches. Let's go back to the war being in a stalemate. So, even though either side was at a disadvantage and nobody was gaining land on each other and nobody was conquering over each other, nobody had the victory. The U.S. got victory when they began to send in allies and they began to send in recruits. And they begin to send in people that can help them overcome their enemy. And then they begin to push. They begin to push back against them. They begin to overcome and they begin to rise up out of their trenches. How many of you are willing to push and rise up out of depression? How many of you are willing to push and come up out of all your trials and all your tribulations? It all depends on you. It depends on your willingness to push. And sometimes we may not think that we are behind enemy lines, but living in the world today is simply behind enemy lines. Don't get too comfortable behind enemy lines. See, that's the problem with some of the people in the church today. They begin to set up camp behind enemy lines and they get comfortable and they begin to say, oh, he can't attack me. I'm here. It's okay. I'm still lifting up my praises. I'm still shouting. But don't forget that he is developing a strategy against you. Let's turn to Acts 12:7. This is a different story, but I got a point to it, I promise. Suddenly there was a bright light in the cell. An angel of the Lord stood before Peter. Then the angel struck him to the side to awaken him and said, quick, get up, and the chains fell off his wrist. We get so comfortable behind enemy lines that when God tries to shake us and free us and deliver us from behind enemy lines, we don't move. But here Peter moved, and I've heard people say, I wonder what would have happened if Peter wouldn't have moved, if Peter would have stayed asleep, or Peter would have just lollygagged and got behind. Don't you be the one to find out behind enemy lines what happens when you don't move when God begins to tell you to. When we put on the armor of God, I feel like that's when we can begin to push. And we just look at this thing as, oh, I'm just going to put on the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of peace. But I'm telling you today, when you begin to put on the armor of God and you begin to fight back, it's really hard for the enemy to throw punches at you because he can't break through that breastplate. And he can't break through you swinging a sword at him. There is promised land behind enemy lines, and there's promised blessings for us. But don't get so caught up that you forget what you're there for. And every day it may seem like a battle, but you have to know that your war is already won. And even though that you are fighting every day behind enemy lines, and maybe you're like, well, God, this is hard to do. Jesus, it's just trials and tribulations, and they hit me left and right, and I'm not sure what to do. You have to know that your war is already won. If you've learned anything about World War I, you know that there were many battles, and some we won and some we lost, but in the end, we still won the war. Our war was won when Jesus died on the cross for us, and he said it is finished. This included the war for us and our war behind enemy lines.